This is your 14th program in the series on world history. It is about imperialism and World War I. This program will discuss the practice of foreign expansion called imperialism and how this practice was to develop into one of the major causes of World War I. This program will deal particularly with Europe's reaction to the First World War. Imperialism, or empire building, is as old as recorded history. Just as the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans attempted to expand their boundaries, so did the more powerful of the European nations during the 18th and 19th centuries. After 1871, Europe entered into a vigorous phase of overseas expansion, often referred to as the New Imperialism. Today, the term imperialism is often used as an epithet since the free world professes belief in self-rule, but imperialism still exists in various forms. There are four basic forms of imperialistic control. One form is the colony, in which a powerful nation openly rules an undeveloped area as a possession. It practices direct political control over the people and resources of the undeveloped land. In the protectorate form of imperialism, a powerful nation rules the undeveloped land by indirect political control. There is a native government in the controlled area, but this government is under the control of the powerful nation. All decisions of the local government must be approved by the powerful nation. By using its influence and money, the larger and more powerful country in a protectorate system is able to exert indirect political control. What form of imperialism allows a country to practice direct political control over another territory? Yes, an imperialistic nation might also lend money to a less developed country and in turn receive certain concessions. This could give the powerful country exclusive control over a particular natural resource within another country. For instance, a large nation that is industrially developed may sign an agreement with a small undeveloped nation to mine, process, and export a particular mineral. For this service, the smaller nation will promise not to sell or allow other nations to develop that mineral. The fourth and most common form of imperialism is the sphere of influence. Political imperialism, based on spheres of influence, allows a powerful nation to control indirectly much of the government of a smaller country by economically helping or hindering its commerce. The large country may give financial or military aid to the smaller country, or simply encourage trade by establishing low import duties for its products. Imperialism is a method of extending a nation's power or control either over the country itself or merely some of its resources. What form of imperialism might exercise control mainly over a particular resource a country might have? Right. By the end of World War I, a new form of imperialism became popular. A large country would have indirect political control over a smaller country through direct economic control. What is this most common form of imperialism? Yes. Africa of the 19th century became the object of European imperialism. The first use of private imperialism in Africa occurred in 1878, when Leopold II of Belgium convinced Belgian bankers to underwrite the International Congo Association, a private venture in the purchase of Congo land for the exploitation of rubber resources. African chiefs agreed to the development of vast regions for small payments. When word of the Congo Company reached other European nations, a land rush began. German and French investors began to buy African land in hope of discovering valuable resources. Until well into the 20th century, much of Africa was owned by private corporations. A report of the nearly slave labor conditions in the African mines and plantations finally forced the Belgian government to take over the Congo as a territorial possession. Conflict seemed certain between the various European nations as they sought to obtain more and more African land. The British soon found themselves in dispute with the Dutch, French, and Germans. Italy found itself at war with the natives in North Africa. After a number of battles and broken agreements, the European powers had moved closer to the beginning of World War I. Imperialism in Africa really began in earnest in 1878 when a private corporation bought the Congo. Which European country did this corporation represent? Yes. How did the imperialistic movement in Africa lead the European nations closer to the beginning of World War I? Right. International tension was also multiplied by imperialism on the Asian continent. Conquest of far eastern countries had begun in the 16th century during the era of discovery and exploration. It had continued for almost 400 years without meeting any serious resistance. By the late 19th century, virtually all the Pacific Islands had been gathered into Western hands. The Dutch controlled the East Indies, the Germans had the Carolines, and the Americans controlled the Philippines, Guam, Samoa, and other small atolls. England had made a colony of India. The Russians had moved into Siberia, and the French had established colonies in Indochina. China was to become the focal point for both Eastern and Western imperialism. In 1895, Japan attacked China and forced a split of this giant country. Soon Germany, France, and England had moved in to set up interests in China for themselves. Japan was to remain longer in China and become the most powerful imperialist there because the Western countries were forced to recall their Far Eastern forces for protection during World War I. European nations gained political control over a number of nations and created colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. How early had Asian territory come under the control of Western nations? Yes, which great Asian nation was attacked and divided by Japan, England, Germany, and France in the late 19th century? Yes, there were several basic causes for World War I. Among them were the rival ambitions among the Western powers for imperialist holdings, excessive nationalistic pride, the armaments race that developed in the face of political and economic rivalry, and the struggle of suppressed peoples for independence. Among the other reasons for World War I was the geopolitical drive to control the world's natural resources and the absence of any effective world organization that might have prevented war through peaceful settlement of disputes. The act which caused the outbreak of World War I occurred in Sarajevo, Bosnia, when the Austrian Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated by a member of a secret society for the creation of a greater Serbia. On July 28, 1914, Austria declared war on Serbia. The fight had begun. Why was World War I not prevented by a world peace organization like the United Nations? Right. War had begun due to several basic causes. What event sparked the outbreak of World War I? Yes. Russia had long supported Serbia, and when Austria declared war on Serbia, Russia began to mobilize her troops. Germany warned Russia to cease mobilizing, and when Russia refused, Germany declared war on Russia. France was displeased with Germany's declaration of war and threatened to help Russia. On August 3, 1914, Germany marched through Belgium, a neutral country, on her way to fight France. England declared war on Germany in protest of the invasion of Belgium. From 1914 to 1918, the greatest war in history to that date was fought. Before it was over, 30 nations had become participants. 65 million men bore arms. 8,500,000 soldiers were killed, 29 million were wounded. A countless number of civilians were killed, and some $200 billion had been spent. In the beginning of the war, it appeared the well-equipped and trained German armies would sweep across Europe. But the war settled down to a long stalemate fought in no-man's lands, from fixed trenches along the Western Front in France and Belgium. The Allies, France, England, and later the United States and Italy, had few successful counterattacks against the Germans and Austrians. By the end of World War I, 30 nations had become involved. What were the first two countries to declare war upon each other? Yes, World War I was characterized by a particular type of warfare. How was most of the war fought along the Western Front in France and Belgium? Right. Only in one direction did the Germans meet with any real success. In 1917, the German armies attacked and held Russia. A revolution was going on in Russia, and the Bolsheviks, who had taken over the government, immediately decided to seek peace with Germany. In 1918, Russia formally withdrew from World War I by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Probably the major reason that Germany did not finally win World War I was the entry of the United States on the side of France and England in 1917. Provoked by submarine warfare, sabotage, plots with Mexico, and German threats, America declared war on April 6, 1917, and was effective in turning the tide. By 1918, the entry of men and materiel from America gave the Allied powers, under the command of French General Ferdinand Foch, the strength to mount a final offensive. It broke the German lines and forced the Germans to sue for peace on November 11, 1918. During the final months of the war, the fortunes of Germany were reversed. Germany, however, was never really in a strong position during the war. The only real military success of Germany came in 1917 when Germany attacked and held a powerful nation. What nation was this? Yes. On January 18, 1919, the Allies met in Versailles, France, to decide the fate of their conquered enemies. Woodrow Wilson represented the United States. Lloyd George of England, Clemenceau of France, and Orlando of Italy were the European Allied leaders. What major factor was probably responsible for Germany not winning World War I? Right. For the most part, Wilson was interested in working out a treaty that would ensure lasting world peace, one that would include a League of Nations. But the European leaders seemed more interested in making the peace a vengeful and profitable one at the expense of the conquered nations. Germany was forced to give back all the land it had seized during the war. The Allies then stripped Germany of all military power and made it submit to occupation of its territory in order to ensure enforcement of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was declared guilty of starting the war and was therefore made to bear the expense of repairing the damage. In exchange for many concessions to the nationalist and imperialist aims of the victorious Allied powers, Wilson demanded that Article 1 of the Versailles Treaty be a covenant for a League of Nations to which all the victorious powers would belong, and to which would be given sufficient power to stop all future wars. Reparation costs of World War I ran to some $60 billion. Who was made to bear the expense of repairing the damages done by World War I? Yes. In earlier centuries, several proposals have been drawn up aimed at establishing some kind of international organization. In what document is the League of Nations proposed and its purposes set forth? Yes, the League of Nations was established as a peacekeeping force. It consisted of a World Assembly, a World Court, and other agencies to ensure world peace. In 1919, it seemed that the terrible ordeal of World War I had taught the world a lesson. Disarmament conferences met, new countries were formed, and imperialism began to decline. Perhaps peace would finally be achieved. In this program, you have seen how imperialism spread across the globe and became one of the major causes of World War I. Man's hopes were high in 1919 that the world would never again face such a terrible ordeal. But in less than 20 years, the Earth was to witness a still greater battle among the nations. World War II was approaching.